So thank you once again, Beth. So now I'm going to move forward to Alan, if that's all right, who's going to talk, I think, about developing local sustainability and so on. So if you can unmute, Alan, if that's all right. Thank you very much. Wonderful.
Thank you, Chris, and just wanted to say a quick thank you to Barry and the team for convening this. It's always great to get to speak to others across the UK working on these issues and passionate about this work. As has already been mentioned, I work with the Bristol City Office looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'm going to take you through briefly some of the history around that, some of the work that we've done and how that's developed, and then some of the ways that we've sort of tried to practically make the SDGs relevant and take action as a city on some of these goals. So, the work in Bristol began through grassroots advocacy towards the end of our Green Capital year in 2015. As a city, we wanted to try and engage with the Sustainable Development Goals that had just recently been created and adopted. And so what happened was the formation of the SDG Alliance that we have. And that alliance then developed into a partnership within the city between the council, the University of Bristol and the Bristol Green Capital Partnership to try and think about how we could locally work on the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's through the role that I do as the Research and Engagement Associate for the city. So on the one hand, it's working with an academic at the University of Bristol, looking at the Sustainable Development Goals and how the localization efforts elsewhere can be applied to Bristol. But on the other hand, it's also working with engagement in the city, both within the City Council, but also with a wider network through the SDG Alliance. The Alliance was then supported, as I said, through my role and funded to try and support local stakeholders in understanding how they could use the SDGs. That point of how are these goals relevant? How is this international framework relevant to the city? How do we make it real to people in Bristol, as Beth was just saying? And it also became a role of embedded advocacy within the City Council, helping local authority stakeholders understand what the SDGs meant and understand what this framework was and how it could help. And the result of all that has been a great intake and an uptake in the use of the SDGs in Bristol. So as I mentioned about this SDG Alliance that we have, it's a cross-sector stakeholder network of well over 140 members now. I think that we're pushing nearly 170 on recent count, and it meets every 6 to 8 weeks. It's an informal network that is there to share best practice about the SDGs from the local level, from national counterparts, and also from international organizations, as well as providing opportunities for advocacy. It contains representatives from the City Council, from businesses, public sector, the universities, and from community groups as well. So it's a real range of organisations and individuals. And it's been one of the key advocacy tools for how we've developed greater interest and activity on the SDGs in Bristol. In terms of the work within the City Council, what we've been doing has been happening at the same time as conversations around wider governance within Bristol. So in 2019 we launched what was the One City Plan, and many of the activities within this One City Plan are directly relevant to the SDG targets. And so what we did was a similar piece of work to what Beth mentioned around mapping and understanding the relevance of the targets. We came out with slightly fewer targets relevant to Bristol based on some of that mapping exercise, but used some of the same benchmarks to understand which targets were relevant. We wanted to use the SDG targets and the framework as a way of understanding how we were progressing towards this long-term vision that we'd established in the One City Plan. And we wanted to use that as a way of monitoring how we were performing against the plan. Our One City Plan is a vision for the city to 2050, and it's structured around 6 themes: connectivity, economy, environment, health and well-being, homes and communities, and learning and skills, as you can see on the screen at the moment. And all of those are underpinned by our efforts towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So all of the work of these different boards is thinking about how they can deliver on the 17 goals. Each of the 6 themes has a board that's associated with them with representatives from those sectors in the city. So our connectivity board has representatives from our local bus operators as well as from some of our sustainable transport networks. Our economy board represents the culture sector, the shops and businesses, the Chamber of Commerce, all sorts of different stakeholders sit on those boards, and we work with those stakeholders to help them understand how to use both the Sustainable Development Goals, but also how to engage across the different boards so that we can be tackling these issues in a coherent way. As Beth was saying, it's a really important way of engaging between different sectors and de-siloing these issues so that we're not just working in individual challenges, but working across the piece throughout the city. It's already been mentioned, but Bristol undertook a voluntary local review as a result of some of this work, and that was funded by the University of Bristol in partnership with the City Office. It worked. It was one of the first voluntary local reviews to try and understand all 17 goals. So this was an approach that was developed by the City of New York to try and monitor their own work on the Sustainable Development Goals. And what we wanted to do in Bristol was understand what the full set of activity in the city was, not just on some of the specific priority goals, but on all of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we used data for over 140 indicators to provide a comprehensive baseline on the Sustainable Development Goals. And we consulted city partners as well, because we wanted to reflect the efforts of organisations in the city, not just the efforts of the City Council, which was something that's slightly different to what many cities around the world have done so far on voluntary local reviews. Most cities focus internally on what the city councils can deliver. But actually, as a local authority in the UK, we don't necessarily hold the same levers of power as many other local authorities around the world. And so what we wanted to do was actually reflect the fact that we need to work in partnership to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. As was already mentioned, we were one of the first in the world to undertake this work, and we created a handbook that other local authorities in the UK can use to try and think about some of the data around this. And we're currently working with the Office for National Statistics to support other local authorities in engaging with the SDGs. In terms of the One City approach and the work on this, we're trying to make sure that going forward in the post-COVID world, we're using the SDGs as a key framework for our thinking, ensuring that our recovery is fair, healthy and sustainable, and that actually our structures and strategies are integrated and holistic so that we break down those silos. We want to make sure that fairness, health and sustainability, as well as inclusion, are at the core of our building back better. In terms of what this actually has meant, I'm going to go on to some of the sort of concrete tangibles with the last couple of minutes that I have left. You can see in the bottom left the voluntary local review, and there's a number of examples of activities that have occurred around the SDGs in that report. As I mentioned, about 90 organisations were profiled in that report. But I'm going to be focusing particularly on the period-friendly Bristol work that we've done, as well as mentioning a few other activities. For example, we've had a Feeding Bristol pilot that was working to try and improve our engagement around food clubs and around food poverty in the city and tackling some of that, as well as working to improve the foster care offer and the number of foster parents and families that we had in the city. A lot of this has come through an approach that we have where we use these events called city gatherings. This is something that our Mayor Marvin Rees, uses to convene stakeholders. You can see a photo of the city gathering in the top left, which is taken from, I think that's from January 2019. And that was where we pulled together about 200 plus stakeholders in the room to discuss our progress towards some of those longer term visions and ideas for the city. From these city gatherings, one of the key things we try to do is use a model of offers and asks. What can you offer the city, and what are you asking from the city in terms of delivery? Big offer, big ask. And so I'll just scroll through some examples of what those are. But for example, here we've got one from the Living Wage City, working with the TUC in the southwest to help Bristol become a living wage city. So the offer was that we could provide that, and the ask was that we wanted organisations to consider whether they would pledge to pay the living wage to their employees. Another is around foster care. We wanted Bristol to be a city where every child has a family that they can live with. And we wanted support for recruiting new foster carers. And that was about working with the HR departments of organisations to think about how their human resources policies could improve the foster care offer. I'll scroll through some of these a bit quicker so I can get on to one concrete tangible. But similar around Bristol Works and providing work experience, our energy provider that we have in the city, working with them to think about how organisations could use the sustainable energy that we have, and then also period poverty. This was a program that we ran in 2019 and is ongoing still in the city to try and improve the issue of period poverty and tackle this issue in Bristol. We came up with the development of a charity called Period Friendly Bristol, but it's something that we want to be using and replicating elsewhere. So actually there's a whole approach around period friendly places that we're working on as well to help roll this out in other locations. It was a real partnership approach from organisations across the city. We had large employers like Burgess Salmon, one of our large law firms, Hargreaves Lansdown, an investment group in the city, as well as small community organisations from our Off the Record who work with youth in the city, City to Sea who think about sustainability and recycling, as well as then with some of the Government Equalities Office, the Department for Education, and some of our sports teams, so Bristol City Community Trust and the Community Trust for Bristol Rovers, two of the football teams, got really involved in this project. It was part education program to work with school children and get them engaging with the issues around the period dignity and period poverty in the city, and working with teachers to help the children and the whole system understand that this is a real issue for many people in the city. But it was also about providing period friendly points where people could pick up free period products and sanitary products for those who needed them. We worked with a number of organisations in the city to try and use open data to create a platform which could then allow people to either host a period-friendly box or to be able to find information. And we piloted this in some of our most deprived wards in the city so that people in those areas had easy access to these products. That's all I have to say on the sort of specific project side of things for Bristol. But I'm happy to take a few more questions towards the end about how we did this and any other questions you might have about the approach that we took in Bristol. But the idea behind our Sustainable Development Goals approach is one that it's all about the whole city. It's about the whole organisation and every organisation coming together to partner on this work. So I'll hand back to Chris, but thank you again for having me today and for hearing me speak about this.